This is 91.3 FM, WCUW in Worcester, Massachusetts, the Dr. Chris Radio of Horror program. And tonight on Radio of Horror, we have distinguished guests on the show from the horror industry. We have Michael Felsher from Red Shirt Pictures behind Synapse Films' new Just Desserts Creepshow documentary. And then we have, further down from the state from me in Boston, we have Billy Coyne, makeup artist, on the show with us as well. Thank you both for coming on the show, and thank you, Billy, for talking with me with Michael about Just Desserts.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me as well.
As soon as I saw that Just Desserts was coming out, I think this was like months ago, probably in the wintertime, I was going out of my mind because I was like, oh my God, I've heard about this thing. In fact, I thought I saw it on YouTube at one point, but I didn't want to watch it because I hate pirating stuff like that.
And I appreciate that. Thank you.
But I was like, always, I must have been one of the many, many millions of horror fans out there that was always really disappointed in Warner Brothers and their piss-poor, lackluster DVD and Blu-ray releases of Creepshow. But we have this documentary now, so that's good. But do we know
Thank
why?
God for this documentary.
Do we know why Warner Brothers has kind of been not so great with the Creepshow? DVD
I want to
releases?
just, I mentioned this on the commentary track I did. I don't have any really hard feelings against Warner Brothers. Being in the industry,
we do,
and having done this now for quite some time, you get to understand why the studios operate the way they do sometimes, especially in regards to their catalog. Because Creepshow was a title that they acquired back in '82. It wasn't produced by them. It was actually produced by another company.
UDC, right?
Yeah, the United Film Distribution Company, which was part of a 3-picture deal that they had with George following their success with Dawn of the Dead. And the 3 pictures were Night Riders, Creepshow, and Day of the Dead. But because of an interesting turn of events at a screening that they held out at the Cannes Film Festival, they got Warner Brothers interested in picking up Creepshow for theatrical here in the States. So that's how Warner Brothers ended up with it. Now, not that they didn't care about it, because obviously they acquired it and they spent some money on it, but it was weird because even their original theatrical campaign, was number one. It was George's only number one film that he ever had at the box
office.
office.
Right? Yeah,
for
for
1
a
week.
week.
For 1 week, and then they pulled the advertising for it. They just kind of went, well, it's had its time and let's go, even though it was doing extremely well. So they kind of shortchanged it theatrically. And then it came out on VHS back in the day, and it just kind of became one of their catalog titles. And, obviously horror films were not the candidates that studios would normally choose to do new special editions of. Certainly not in the Laserdisc days. A lot of the independent companies like Elite Entertainment would, do something like that, or they would try to sub-license. And then DVD, again, those weren't necessarily the titles that were going to be focused on by the big studios, unless it was something like An Exorcist or something that was really, really huge. And Warner Brothers has always been I always describe them as kind of a closed shop, because they do all their features kind of in-house. They have their own clients. They don't really take, outside clients in very often, and they don't do a lot of special editions of a lot of their catalog titles. So Creepshow was really way down on the priority list. And I get that because, again, these guys are multi-billion-dollar companies. They've got Lord of the Rings movies and Harry Potter movies to focus on. They've got ridiculous bottom lines. And, doing a special edition of a cult horror film from 1982 isn't something that they can really devote a lot of resources towards. So I get that. And I've encountered that at a lot of studios. But anyway, I came up with this idea to do the special edition when I was working on Diary of the Dead with George in 2006. And he was all about it, and I knew a lot of the other cast and crew, and I was like, well, I got to put together a proposal and send it to Warner Brothers. And I did know somebody over there through another friend of mine, and I got the proposal in front of them, and I'll give them credit. They actually looked at it, and they did come back to me and said, it's just not something we're interested in doing right now. So that was disappointing, and now I was like, well, that's pretty much the end of it. But then through a weird series of events, Universal Pictures in the UK ended up with the rights, because Warner Brothers only had rights, I believe, for North America. They didn't acquire it for other areas in the world. So the rights for Creepshow are kind of spread out all over the place over, several different companies. And it's gotten even worse as time has gone on because like one company that owned it here has been swallowed up by this other company and it's just really bizarre. So Universal ended up sub-licensing it from another company for the UK. I gave my proposal to them. They went for it and said, sure, we'll do it, because they couldn't give me very much money. So at that time, it's interesting now, this wouldn't happen today, but they basically said, well, we can only give you this much money to do all this. I said, well, that's fine, but let me keep the rights for it outside of the UK. Yeah. Because you guys don't have any rights for it outside of the UK anyway, so it's not really any good for you. And plus, it's a compensation for the fact that I'm not getting paid very much, which I was okay with because it's a small market, and I understood why. So they was able to make that deal, and it came out in the UK, and then it was reissued on Blu-ray by Second Sight not too long ago, and I just got to the point where it's just like, well, I mean, why don't I just bring this out by myself here in the States? It just seemed the natural thing to do, and Synapse was all about it. And I mean, I've known Don and Jerry for years. And,
those are great guys.
They are. They're two of my favorite people in the world. So it was just like, everything's done for it pretty much. And I needed to do some extras and a couple other things. So I raised some money on an Indiegogo for that. And once I got that money, I finished off everything, gave it to Synapse, and bing, bang, boom, it's finally out. After this year will mark, actually next year will be the 10th anniversary of when I shot it.
Wow. Yeah, because I remember when the Region 2 came out over in the UK, and a lot of people here in the States were like, when are we going to get one?
Yeah,
especially considering how the DVD had a bevy of bonus features on the Region 2. One thing that was really impressive after watching Just Desserts is how you also incorporated a bevy of features as well. It's like, the Grand Illusions Tom Savini documentary.
The Screen Grace thing.
Sorry, Screen Grace, yes. And how he has a commentary on that. And, it's just a great bevy of bonus features. And I was actually going over the features last night. And this definitely seems like something that the true diehard Creepshow fans, I mean, this is like, that it's wonderful to have something here in the States that we can truly enjoy, knowing how the Region 2 came out a while ago, and it's almost like a more brains, like Return of the Living Dead, like a real definitive edition of Creepshow. And I know the diehard fans definitely, this is something that we have been waiting for a long time. And, I think the best thing to say is, thank you for bringing this to the masses, because there's definitely a huge cult following behind this movie.
Yeah, there is, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it was never intended to be released by itself. It was always going to be something that was there to complement the movie. So it's interestingly enough, if I were to do it today, and with the intention of releasing it by itself, I would have probably made it differently. I would have structured it a little bit differently. I probably would have made it a little longer, although I think it plays fine at the length that it's at now. It's just the way fate, it was like, it's just sitting there. So, and it was one of the few things I do actually control rights for this country. Because, these days it's, you do something for a studio and they own it worldwide. They just lock up the rights and say that's it, which I get, and sometimes you can negotiate territories for yourself. Other times you can't. And it's just an interesting business to be in at times. But, I'm glad that this is finally out, because it's been one of those albatrosses hanging around my neck for a long period of time. And it's nice to have had it come out, and nice to have had it so well received. I was actually quite blown away by the reaction that it got and the reception that it got when it came out. Not just that it got good reviews, because it had gotten a lot of good notice when it first came out overseas, but that people really wanted to buy it. And I hope that I made the package worthwhile for them. It was important to me that to not just throw the documentary out there, to put as many special features as I could on there, to make it a full package that people could really enjoy.
Yeah, a nice definitive edition.
As definitive as you can get. The word definitive gets me in trouble, because I used to work at Anchor Bay Entertainment, and whenever we would say, this is it, the definitive edition, someone would come back, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't have the Pakistani trailer on it, so this is not definitive, I'm sorry. So it's like, I don't believe in the word definitive anymore. I just think this is as good as it could possibly be at the moment, And then there you go.
Yeah, because I was actually curious, like, how long did it take to acquire all of the footage for the for the behind the scenes and the bonus features? Like, how long did that process take?
Not very long, because most of that was acquired. Certainly all the video footage was Tom Savini. And Tom is one of my favorite people in the world, period. And he's, whenever I do a project with him, it's great because I'm just like, Tom, what do you have? And he just hands me tapes and photos and say, here's what I've got. And because he's a pack, he keeps everything. He documents his work extremely well.
Yeah, because I remember at orientation, when I went to Tom Savini's program, I mean, he had so much footage that he showed us from Creepshow and all the different movies. So, I mean, he definitely, just documents everything from, testing makeups to, the execution and just, other behind the scenes stuff as well. So it seems like he's definitely really good at archiving, the stuff that he's attached to.
Oh yeah. So there was a treasure trove just with him alone. But then what happened is you go along with this. When you interview people and talk to them, you always ask the question, hey, did you take any photos on the set? Did you keep anything? And I found that there were a lot of people on this project in particular who had stuff that just been, oh yeah, I have this photo book here, and here's all these Polaroids I took. So we would find stuff as we went along. So to get a lot of the archival stuff, I would say took about as long as the production did, because you were finding stuff as you went along, stuff that you had to ask about because you wouldn't know about otherwise.
Yeah, really cool.
There was a great Tom Savini kind of spotlight look as a bonus feature on there. It looked like something from like the 90s. Is that part of a series of spotlights on horror icons? Well,
that was it didn't last very long. There was a series that Fangoria started in the mid 1980s called Screen Greats, and it was basically what was intended to be, from what I understand, was a series of horror mini documentaries that focused on a particular subject. Tom Savini for one. The second one that they did was actually about witchcraft and witch movies. And so then there was going to be a third, fourth, and I don't know what the other ones would have been, but it only lasted for 2 episodes. I don't know why it didn't. I don't know if the sales dropped off or what happened there, but they only did 2 of these Screen Greats shorts, and Paramount distributed it back in the day. And Screen Greats Volume 1 ended up. The second one is, a lot of people watched it and everything, but the first one, the one on Tom Savini, ended up being, and if you talk to a lot of makeup effects guys who were coming up around that time, a lot of filmmakers who were coming up around that time, that documentary ended up being very important to a lot of people.
It was the Holy Grail.
Because it really gave you an insight into Tom Savini's process, his methodology, how he collaborated with people, and the techniques that he used. And also at the same time, it was very inspirational, because it was a weird situation in that it caught Tom Savini at what was really his apex as a makeup effects artist. It was shot shortly after Day of the Dead had been completed. In fact, it was shot while Day of the Dead was in its theatrical release, which would have put it in about August, September-ish of maybe into October of 1985. So this was like, he was coming off what was really his greatest triumph as a makeup artist, was him and his crew's effects on Day of the Dead. So we were seeing an artist at his peak, really, at that point. And so we were seeing just an amazing, and he's such a charismatic, ingratiating guy on that thing. I mean, you just wanted to be around him and talk to him, and he inspired a lot of people to want to pursue this as a career. And that special ended up being very influential without a lot of people realizing it at the time. So I wanted to include it on a number of DVD releases I've worked on over the years, because, it covered Friday the 13th, it covered The Burning, it covered Creepshow, it covered Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, a whole slew of them. But the rights for that were a little bit weird, because it was produced by Fangoria or Starlog magazine.
Yeah.
And then Paramount distributed it, but there was this confusion as to, who still controlled it and so forth. And it became a situation where Fangoria, who has also changed hands numerous times over the years, they basically said, well, Paramount still controls it. We've asked them, Paramount still controls it. And so I went to Paramount and said, well, what about, can we sub-license this for, and this wasn't for Just Desserts. I was thinking in terms of a couple other releases I was working on. And they basically said, look, this is something that we had 30 years ago. that we've never reissued. We're probably never going to reissue. We would have to dig records out. That's like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark to kind of, it's just not something. And again, it's just, they're Paramount. They're busy doing, all sorts of other stuff. And this was
like suing Kickstarters for Star Trek.
I mean, they've got other things going on. So at the same time, it was going to be like, well, they're not going to really focus on this. So I kind of had to let it go. And then finally, I went back to them when I was doing the Just Desserts disc. I said, wouldn't it be great to be able to include this? And basically what they agreed to do, what they sent me was, look, we're just going to say it's okay. Because we don't have the time. Our records are not, basically say that we don't really even know what this is. So it's like, so basically they're just like, look, so they sent me an email saying basically,
good job, multi-billion-dollar studio.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I got to give them a lot of credit because at the end of the day, I think they realize this isn't worth getting into a big fight over. And Fangoria gave me, I checked with Fango and they say, hey, look, if you can clear it, go right ahead. You have our blessing. And so Fango was fine with it. Paramount gave me something in writing that I could at least hold up and say, okay, they said it was fine. And so yeah, it was great to be able to get this on there because it was hugely influential for me. I even tried to get into makeup effects because of that thing. I only lacked any kind of ability whatsoever.
You need that.
I was absolutely talentless, and it was one of those things where I didn't even enjoy it. It would have been one thing if I enjoyed doing makeup effects. I wasn't any good at it, but at least I enjoyed it. But I was fully aware of how crappy I was, so it made it really quite miserable. But it made me want to look into the filmmaking side of things and continue on. So it was to be able to include that was great, and then to be able to do a commentary with Tom for it that not only talked about how the Screen Grades thing came up, but covered everything that has happened to him since that was completed. So basically we talk about, hey, how did we do the Screen Grades thing? And say, okay, well then after this you did Texas Chainsaw 2 and then the Night of the Living Dead remake. So we cover, it's sort of like a sequel to Screen Grades in audio form. We just sort of cover the 30 years that came after that.
Yeah, you definitely need that physical piece of paper to let them know that you're going to be doing this legitimately, so that way they don't be turning around behind your back after you're about to print the.
Was really cool about it. They understood the situation and knew what I was trying to do with it, and they knew I wasn't trying to get away with anything. And at the end of the day, it was a matter of because both of them and Fangoria gave me permission, I was able to do it. If one or the other hadn't, I wouldn't have been able to move forward with it. So I got to give both of those organizations a lot of thanks because it allows us to be preserved for another generation.
The Tom Savini popped in my head earlier today when I went to go see Don't Breathe, and just before the movie, one of the trailers was for Resident Evil, the final chapter, and I thought immediately of Tom Savini's Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and I was like, bullshit.
And plus, didn't Romero do a draft of...
George was he had it fully. No, he did a couple drafts, and he was ready to direct it. He was that movie was a green light. It was ready to go.
You're talking about the Resident Evil movie that he was going to do.
I think the German company decided to change directions, and they didn't want to do it anymore. And then they ended up doing the Paul Anderson series.
But they did a commercial in Japan with George.
Yes, they did. That was interestingly enough. That I believe that commercial was actually done for the video game company Capcom. But then Capcom licensed the rights to the Resident Evil franchise to I believe a German company called Constantine Film, and then Constantine Film worked with George because he had done the commercial, and then that just fell apart. I mean, George could speak to it much more authoritatively than I could, but basically it just fell apart after as unfortunately a lot of projects did. And he was no longer invited on that.
Was there a script actually written up that fans could probably read?
There was a script. I believe it's floating around out there somewhere. But no, there was definitely a script. I mean, it was far along in the process. This was something that was going to happen.
Well, maybe after this terrible movie comes out in January, they'll reboot it and give it, like, Capcom will take it back unless Sony's going to hold on to the rights to it because Sony's got nothing else going on. I mean, they lost Spider-Man and they're losing battles left and right. Ghostbusters was a disaster for them. It didn't make back what it cost to make the movie. So they need something, and maybe they'll do Resident Evil correctly, but 5 films have not shown us any sign of hope for Sony making a good horror movie based on a video game.
But they have actually brought a cult status to a certain degree. From what I've been able to put together. I mean, I think there's definitely people enjoy these movies, but it seems that it's a little more cult than maybe mainstream.
People enjoy these movies who never played the video games, and that's, I mean, they're making them because, like, Paul W.S. Anderson married a hot woman. They're like, look, we're going to put her in a bunch of movies, and we're just going to throw her up there, and it's going to be an incoherent plot line with superpowers that don't actually make any sense and change from film to film to film, and doesn't everyone see how hot my wife is? Let's put her in action movies. That's all it is.
But actually, one question I had for Michael, considering how, Just Desserts, I mean, it seems like this has a little bit of everything for the diehard fans, like Stephen King fans, George Romero fans, Tom Savini fans. Mm-hmm. And piecing all of this together, I mean, there's definitely, I think, a love letter component to this, to all of these guys. Mm-hmm. Would you think, considering with the success of of the first Creepshow, that you might possibly do this with Creepshow 2?
Creepshow 2 is a little bit more complicated in that production, there's certain people that I would definitely want to get. I mean, I've thought about it, but for me, it's not. I would want to do that in conjunction with a new Blu-ray release, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would want to do that one by itself. I think that there's certainly a lot of stories because Creepshow 2 was not an easy production.
Yeah.
There were a lot of problems with that show, and it was, you talk to any number of people, and it was funny. A lot of people were very proud of their work on it, and they really liked working with Mike Gornick, and there was a lot. But it was a film where they just didn't have the money to pull a lot of stuff off, and it was a situation where they had 5 stories originally. They had to cut it down to 3. And it's just a film that, for me, I mean, I like it more now than I did back then.
Yeah.
And I think it's a film that's definitely worth exploring. But as whether it would be enough for its own standalone documentary, I don't know. I think it would be great to do it a full retrospective that was part of a new Blu-ray release. As I said with Just Desserts, that wasn't really intended to be a standalone thing. It ended up being that, and I think it works fine as that. But I don't know. If it's something that if someone approached me to work on a new Blu-ray of it, I would jump at it.
Probably be like a Blu-ray and maybe like a 90-minute feature length.
Yeah. I would think there's certainly enough stories there, and there's a lot of good behind-the-scenes footage and archival materials, probably even more so than the first Creepshow. So
yeah, well, you have K&B also on the second one. Nicotero, he recorded everything just as much as Tom.
Well, he and Howard. That wasn't K&B officially at that point because it was actually another effects artist show, and then Howard Berger came in to replace him. It was originally to assist him, and then he ended up taking over. Then Greg came in as well. Robert Kurtzman didn't actually work on that, and they actually formed K&B about a year and a half later after that.
Now, isn't the Tales from the Dark Side like the third Creepshow movie?
Unofficially, it kind of is.
Because that third Creepshow movie is kind of garbage.
Well, the third Creepshow movie, I mean, I don't like bashing other people's work and stuff like that, but
that's okay. We're film critics.
I tried watching it, and I blacked out about 20 minutes into it, and I woke up, passed out on my kitchen floor next to a dead hobo. So I don't know what the hell happened.
So it sounds like you would enjoy a handle of cracking straight up than half an hour of Creepshow 3.
I'll say this. There was I did a Q&A or an intro to something at a convention many, many years ago, and I don't know how Creepshow 3 came up, but it did, and I remember making some disparaging comments about it, very similar to what I just said, and someone in the back called out, I was in Creepshow 3, and it was Eileen Dietz,
yes,
who was
yes, I was gonna say it had to have been her.
Yeah, and she's I was in Creepshow 3, and I went, oh, I'm sorry, Eileen, and she just went, no, it's okay, I get it. It was just like, okay, so she wasn't really upset either.
Yeah, she was at Rock and Shock promoting that like 1 year, I think, when it came out, and I was just like,
yeah,
really? Is that what you want to be known for?
It's damn near unwatchable, and I really cannot tell you much about all I remember was just pain. But I do, but no, Tales from the Dark Side is kind of unofficially Creepshow 3. It may have actually started out as being that, but because they decided they didn't, the rights to Creepshow were complicated, and they did have the rights on the Tales from the Dark Side series, they just essentially did Creepshow 3. And actually, one of the stories in Tales from the Dark Side was originally earmarked for Creepshow 2, which was the Cat from Hell.
And the whole point
Really?
And the whole point.
Yeah, the one with William Hickey, right?
Yeah.
And the whole
Originally,
point.
there were 5 stories. There were 5 stories, and it was the Hitchhiker, Old Chief Woodenhead, the Raft, Cat from Hell, and a bowling story, a haunted ghost bowling story called Pinfall. Pinfall ended up getting cut because it was way too expensive, and then similar thing happened with Cat from Hell, and then they just focused on the 3 stories.
And and Creepshow, I mean, was originally supposed to be Tales from the Crypt, but you couldn't get the rights to. They couldn't get the rights to that.
Well, I think it was a matter of they wanted to do something in that vein, but they didn't want to try to acquire rights to something anyway. They just wanted to do their own thing. So it was always perceived as a tribute. They were always going to just do their own thing that was in the vein of EC Comics, Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, that sort of thing. We
had Joe Hill on the show, and I mentioned him about Creepshow, following his career as far back as Creepshow, making a joke about it. And he's like, he sounds like he's in absolute pain and agony bringing it up because he's like, I'm so old you mentioning that movie.
Well, it's funny. I remember it was actually at a.
And now he's working on a Tales from the Dark Side comic book series.
Well, I find it interesting to see the direction he's gone into. It was weird. I was in Worcester at Rock and Shock, I think 10 years ago, maybe 12. It's been a while now. But I was there, and I was standing near George's table talking to someone, and this kid walked by who was this long, tall, gangly kid, big bushy beard, and he walked by, and I just kind of did a double take. I said, Jesus Christ, if I didn't know better, I would say that's a young Stephen King that just walked by. This kid was like a dead ringer for him. I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. It was Joe Hill.
Oh, wow.
And he went up to say hi to George. I'm like, son of a bitch, no wonder I thought it was Stephen King. It's like, he looks just like him. So it was just, that was really interesting.
The year you're talking about would have been 2010. That's the last time George was at Rock and Shock. He came to Rock and Shock again last year as well.
I think this was even before 2010.
Yeah, no, because I think it was like 2005 or 6. Because I know he's been there before. And I remember I would say it's at least been more than 5 years, but less than 10. I mean, I would say at least.
Yeah, I know it's more than 5 years ago because it was the first time I was at Rock and Shock. So it might have been their first or their second show.
Oh.
And I remember it was right around the time that it was right after Land of the Dead. So that would have been 05, 06, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yeah, because I've actually been going to the convention over 10 years now. I missed the very first year, but ever since then I've been attending all the shows.
I think a lot of people missed the very first year. They weren't as it wasn't as kind of spread word of the mouth yet. And then I missed the 2005 show, which had the big Fog reunion.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I haven't been able to go there very often. It's just it's a really rough time of year for me because I'm usually shooting stuff, doing other shows, or just traveling a lot during October. And to be able to go out that way, it always never seems to work out. It did last year, and I was very happy about that.
Gotcha.
I don't know if it's going to work out this year either, but I hope so, but it probably won't.
Well, it was wonderful talking to the both of you guys, and thank you for your time and having me on the show. And thank you for letting me be able to help promote the show, and the release of Just Desserts as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for having me on as well. And if you're in Worcester, Massachusetts, go to a place called the Flying Rhino. There's a little restaurant there not far from the convention center where they hold Rock and Shock. They don't have it right now, but they had a sandwich called the Country Chicken Sandwich, was the best sandwich I ever had in my whole fucking life, and they took it off the menu a little while ago, so I've been lobbying for them to put it back on. So if you're out there and you're listening, Flying Rhino, put the Country Chicken Sandwich back on the fucking menu, and I will come back there every day next time I visit there, and I'll eat it 3 times a day, I promise, but put the fucking sandwich back on the menu. That's all I'm going to say.
Michael, where
if you
can
come to Rock and Shock, I will make it for you.
It's a good goddamn sandwich.
Michael, where can people go to get information about Red Shirt Pictures and to talk to you about Just Desserts?
You can go to redshirtpictures.com. I don't update it as much as I should. I don't seem to have the time anymore. But redshirtpictures.com or go to Red Shirt Pictures on Facebook.
Cool, awesome. And Billy, where can people find out more information about your amazing special effects makeup artist work?
You can find me at twoheadedproductions.com, or you could even find me on Facebook at Billy Coyne on what the hell is it, Twitter? No, Well, either way, those are the two best places to find me. I'd give my phone number out, but
no, that's okay. That's okay.
Generous.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on, and thank you, Billy, for talking with me with Michael about the Just Desserts, which you can go to synapsefilms.com to order your copy.
Thanks. I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.